I want to talk about, this is a little bit of a serious conversation, but it's an important one, right? I want to talk about destroying the poverty mindset. No matter where you place someone, no matter what environment they're in, if they haven't made any shifts in their mindset, the things that were there before are going to continue to show up.
Right.
And not just that, but let's just be realistic. For our people, for our community, we aren't going to be able to move everyone into a different space. Meaning that we can't take all of Marcy Projects, all of Brevoort, all of Roosevelt,
right,
and all of a sudden put them in Westchester in big houses with huge lawns. But that being said, it doesn't mean that the people who are there, the people who are in community, the people who are not in those spaces where they have the mobility should have to be with a pissy elevator in Building 7 in every project.
Right.
Right? That is more of a function of environment and mindset within an environment. So regardless of where you are, I think that there are a lot of things that we need to think about as a community and as a collective to begin to dismantle that mindset. But I'm curious as to you guys' thoughts.
It's so funny that we're talking about this because I literally had this conversation yesterday about mindset. And so for me, growing up in Clinton Hills, right, which is sort of like a middle class like neighborhood.
Bougie.
Now, yes. But like, you know, like in the neighborhood, like you would cross the street and it's like brownstones, and I've seen people living in brownstones. I live in an apartment, and these are the ones that are like selling drugs and out here toting guns. And I live in an apartment, you know, and to me it's like, oh, a house, like you got money. And so that's when I realized at a young age, it is about mindset. So when you talk about, and particularly like the projects, I mean, you can't talk about this without the introduction to heroin, crack, Vietnam, all this type of stuff that kind of helped to cultivate this. It's hard to change those people's mindsets in that environment because as if you like, you're not going off, another one comes right back in. So there's always gonna be pissy staircases, there's always gonna be pissy elevators because to them, this is the norm.
But where does that come from though? Because the things you said, right? And I'm gonna look at them, I'm gonna back up and look at them at the systemic level. So you talked about substance abuse, which in many cases is a function of self-medication in our community for different things that we're dealing with. You talked about, you know, Vietnam, which right now, the people who are making Elevator 7 or the elevator in Building 7 pissy, they ain't go to Vietnam. They wasn't there, right?
No, right.
But I will say that it in some cases, it is a function of mental health and those issues that are rampant in community, right? So I'm still wondering, where's that behavior learned? Because an 11-year-old who has never done drugs before and didn't go to Vietnam and just going to school, that behavior gets picked up from somewhere. So like, even as the things that you're talking about are valid, how do they get passed on? That's the thing.
Because when they're 11, they're going into a pissy elevator. Like nothing has changed from when it started. Like my mom's family grew up in Sumner Projects, my dad's family grew up in Bayview Projects in Canarsie. And it's the same, every time you show up, it's the same thing. Is the elevator gonna work? And if it does, you get in, you gotta watch out for the piss. It started so long ago. So basically to answer your question, how you change that, like there has to be a concerted initiative to go in and educate people on how to have value for what, even though they don't own it, but to almost like treat it like it's theirs.
I mean, I don't know. I think that we are disregarding the reality of the poverty mindset, right? And the reality around what that contributes and how that contributes to someone's existence in these spaces. Whether we believe it's ours or not ours, those things are not factors that are gonna change our approach to it. It's not ours. It's never been ours. And we're occupying this space feeling like aliens in a space that's not being provided the proper services. You know what I'm saying? If you're in 34th Street and someone does pee in the elevator because people are nasty and do nasty things, there's a system there to clean it up, right?
Yeah.
Because there's an economic sustaining model that's built into that space.
So
that doesn't exist in the projects. At the end of the day, you're dealing with the human being, the humanity. And I'm not saying people humanly are nasty. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that there's a reality that when you have a poverty mindset and a poverty environment, there are things that just simply don't exist. And the fact that the burden should be on the people that's occupying the space to somehow be responsible for JJ on floor 12, it only takes him peeing one a day every day to make it funky. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like everybody's peeing in the elevator. I don't see that to be the case. You know what I'm saying? So I think that there's, I think that poverty reality is something that we have to consider as a factor. But in order to change people, I don't think changing their environment changes their mindset.
No, it doesn't.
I think changing people's mindset is par with really giving them something different. And where's that happening at?
Yeah.
Where are they encountering new information? That's the only way you replace old information. And where are they getting that from? Are they getting it in their school? Are they getting it in their church? Is there some kind of community-based organization that they're coming in contact with that's going to give them that kind of grooming etiquette? Listen, I'm the parent of 18-year-old, soon to be 19, and a 22-year-old. It was incumbent on me to reprogram my kids every day when they came home.
Yeah.
Because they encountered so much crap in the streets. From the time they left at 8 in the morning to start their class till 4 in the afternoon, by the time they got back to me, they have been inundated with so much information. If I didn't have the time in my day, and that, I spent so many years in the industry, I worked a lot of hours. At some points, I didn't have the physical presence of time. But my tribe, my community, to make sure that someone's there to kind of like spoon feed that kid that information. Without that,
that brings up two things that make me think of my mom and the notion of intentional parenting. And one of them was, my mom used the term, you said reprogramming, my mom used the term brainwashing. And she was like, look, I brainwash my kids and I'm okay with that.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, I'm brainwashing them. Both of you guys know my mom. If you met her,
she brainwashed us.
You know what they did, right? She brainwashed y'all, right? The second one is being very clear about the notion of identity. And what you're talking about and what we're also talking about is, in terms of, from my perspective, engaging or dismantling poverty mindset, a lot of it is connected to how in touch with you are you with your actual identity. Who are you? Because if you see certain things about yourself or see yourself in a particular way, you won't succumb to certain behavior because that's not who you are.
Right.
And you're not willing to be in that space. I think that that's fine, well, and good. And I think it's important for us as a baseline. We could start there, right? If you are someone who comes in contact with young people, with people that you are influencing, be very clear about how you engage them from an identity place.
Right.
Around how they see themselves. That's a place to start.
Right.
So, okay, cool. Now we're going. We got something. We got some ingredients we're cooking. The next question becomes, what if you don't have that though? Right? Like, I think that there are people who absolutely, are fortunate enough to have the influence of a parent, a grandparent, an uncle, a mentor, a coach, whatever, who's going to really emphasize this notion of identity, right? In a way that's going to allow you to see yourself different, allow you to think about yourself in a different light. But if you don't have that, what do you do there?
Right.
Because the dismantlement is all a process around how we see ourselves. When you know better, you do better. That's really what it boils down to. And this is not trying to be preachy. It's just about the fact that I think for many of us, like you said, G, it really does come down to information.
Right.
When you don't have the information to look at yourself or your identity in a different manner, what else would you do, right? So I guess that like, to close out, if you will, we were going to sum up. That would be my thought, like, that I'm wondering. What about the people who don't? Like, we could talk about who does and the intentionality behind that, but when that's absent, then what?
Then what?
Well, okay, so I'm gonna tie this all together, and it's actually gonna go back to the idea of ownership, right? So I said my mom's side of the family, some of the projects, my dad's side, Bayview. When I would go to Sumner, I knew I was in the projects. When I was in Bayview, I didn't. At a young age, it didn't feel like, I didn't know it was the projects, and I'm gonna tell you why. Particularly with the building that my family was in. My grandfather was like the self-proclaimed like the landlord. He like ran the building. So he made sure everything was straight and people had respect for the building. And then my cousin and his friends or whatever, like they just lived differently. Like they weren't about they didn't feel poor, right? Even though they were in the projects. Some are completely different. Like everything was trash. So it speaks to your point about having somebody there who can kind of like set a standard to how we should be. And then there's another place where it's like everybody's just running wild. But he treated it like he owned it. And that's why it was kept up. So that's what I'm just saying. Even though you don't own it, treat it like it's yours.
I mean, I think that, ownership is important, but again, I think that a lot of it goes back to just kind of like having the necessary resources, you know what I'm saying, to really kind of create that kind of environment, period. Without the resources, you're just going to succumb to whatever is available and things are just going to be left unkept. A building, any entity is like a living. If you own anything, you realize that your property is like a human being that constantly needs maintenance.
Yeah.
It's always, you know what I'm saying? Like, just like we get our hair done every week, we get our nails done, we got to keep ourselves up. Your property has to be kept up. So if there is no economy centered around maintaining these environments, people are going to succumb to whatever it is, and it's just going to spiral downward.
Agreed.
I in closing out, I'm thinking, CEO, you talked about the difference between Bayview and Sumner. My grandmother was first generation in Dixie Homes in Memphis, Tennessee. And Dixie Homes was and is one of the most sort of well-known housing projects in Memphis. And she always talks about how they moved in first, and it was a big deal because they had stainless steel appliances and like washing machines. It was a big deal. And so my mom always says, we were poor, but we didn't know it, right? And so I do think that, as we have this conversation about disrupting poverty mindset, I think that it does become incumbent upon us when we see it to call it out, because a lot of times we just sort of allow that to exist in a space, and we can't take for granted that someone else is going to do it.
Right.
We can't take for granted that someone else is going to have that conversation. So it really may be that it's one of us who has the discussion that makes somebody think differently about something small. Yeah. Because to Gloria's point, if you don't have the information and no one gives it to you, then you don't know what to do with it.
Correct.
So for everybody who's listening, if you want to start small, if you want to do something about dismantling the poverty mindset in community, it doesn't have to be something huge. It doesn't have to be made. You don't have to go give, your local Section 8 house a makeover. And let's be clear, really quickly before I get off this, it ain't just people in the projects. I've seen plenty of people with dope ass homes and poverty mindsets.
Yep.
And it's horrible, right? So, for anybody, I use that as an example to open up because I think most people understood.
Right.
But be very clear, the mindset will follow you if you don't do anything about it.